Good afternoon, my name is Ethan. Today we're going to be discussing the two books that I studied in my LRSP, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee and Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. We're going to discuss the common theme of prejudice between these two books and deconstruct the two books using the media studies that we discussed in class. A quick rundown of each book. To Kill a Mockingbird takes place in Macomb County in Alabama during the time of the Depression. So a lot of racism going on along with this depression. And the story is about the Finch family. So the father's name is Atticus. He's a prestigious lawyer with really high moral standards. And he has two kids, Scout, which is the narrator of the story. She's a young little girl. And her brother Jem is a couple years older than him. And they have a friend named Dill who comes from Mississippi in the summers to live with Miss Rachel down the street so they can hang out all summer. And the novel really has two sides to it. One where Atticus is assigned a case to defend Tom Robinson, who's a black man, and he was accused of raping a white woman. And we see a lot of prejudice through this, especially in the courthouse when Tom Robinson doesn't really get a chance to defend himself due to the white jury, and you can see how the racism takes place there. And then the other side of the story is how Jem, Scout, and their friend Dill are really intrigued by Boo Radley, who's considered a monster to the community and lives in the haunted house down the street. It's just a really creepy and old house. So they're really intrigued by Boo Radley and want to really meet him. So they try sending him notes and stuff like that. And Boo Radley communicates not verbally, but physically, in the sense that he puts gifts inside a tree for them. But Nathan, Boo Radley's brother, who's watching him and making sure that Boo remains house prisoned, cements up that tree. So Boo doesn't have a chance to communicate with any of them. But we see that that Boo Radley is a hero in the end because he saves Jem when Jem is jumped by a person that's robbing them. And he helps Scout throughout the book. So when Miss Marty's house burns down, Boo Radley's there to put a blanket over Scout, but Scout doesn't know it because of all the adrenaline that's going through her. I'll give you a quick rundown of Mice and Men. The story takes place in Soledad, California, where George and Lenny, two best friends, George is more the leader. Lenny is a big fellow with a mental deficiency. So they're migrant workers, and they got fired from their last farm because Lenny was accused of raping a girl. And then so they go to this new ranch, and they meet lots of new people. But because of Lenny's mental deficiency, he's really gullible. So he tells a lot of people of the plans that him and George made to make a lot of money to go and buy their own farm and live a good life together. So a couple of people join in on this plan, so there's about 4 of them now. But at the end of the story, Lenny has a puppy and he kills it by accident from petting it too hard. So then one of the workers, Curly, his wife, is comforting Lenny. And Lenny is stroking his fingers through her hair and pulls her hair too hard, so she screams. So Lenny covers her mouth because he doesn't know why she's screaming and accidentally snaps her neck and kills her. So then Lenny runs off to the lake where George told him to hide if anything were to happen like this. And George meets him there after guiding the others the wrong way because they're chasing Lenny. And when they're at the lake, it's just George and Lenny, and George brings a shotgun and he shoots Lenny because he knows that Lenny's going to have no purpose to live once he finds out that they won't be going and buying their own farm together and living that fantasy of a life together. Some of my thematic findings in terms of the two books, they share an obvious connection with the theme of prejudice. In Of Mice and Men, Lenny is discriminated and gone against for what he does, because no one else in the books knows that he has a mental deficiency for what he does. So he kills the puppy, he kills the mice in his pocket over the years, and he snaps the girl's neck. So to him it's just pure innocence. He didn't know any better, he didn't mean to do it, but to everyone else he's a criminal. And To Kill a Mockingbird, we see many different situations of prejudice. The obvious one being Tom Robinson's case, in the sense that he's a black man, and he's not given his opportunity to speak up because in that time of the Great Depression and racism, black people were not given any rights by white people. But there are also other areas in the novel where there are a huge amount of prejudice, and it comes in different shapes and forms. So there's prejudice on different levels. So in terms of class, for example, the Eels in To Kill a Mockingbird are very much discriminated against because they are not wealthy. So at this time, the main image was to be white and wealthy. So when you're white, that helps, but you also need that class part, that wealth and a lot of money. So in the book we see that the Ewells, especially the children in school, are discriminated against and judged upon because they don't have enough money to bring a lunch to school every day. And we also see another type of prejudice, but a stereotypical prejudice, and that's with Aunt Alexandra and Scout. So when Aunt Alexandra comes and visits the Finches, she shows up all sophisticated and talks in a sophisticated language, and this is why we hear her call Scout Jean Louise Finch. And she tells Jean Louise Finch to dress more like a sophisticated woman instead of her jeans and overalls, and she dresses like a guy according to Aunt Alexandra. So this is stereotypical prejudice in the sense that she is following what everyone else is doing. Aunt Alexandra may be hiding it, or it may just be her, but she's taken upon the habits of society at that time so that she does not get discriminated upon. So she's trying to fix Scout so that she doesn't get eaten up in the world, but given that Scout's young and innocent, she doesn't really care what other people think at this point, which is a good lesson to learn. Ways when it comes to overt and implied messages, and I feel like in these two texts there's one major overt message, and there are many different implied messages that we can find by digging further into the novels themselves. So the overt message is obviously to not judge a book by its cover, and we see this with one of the most famous lines from To Kill a Mockingbird, when Atticus says that it's a sin to kill a mockingbird. It's a sin to kill a mockingbird because mockingbirds don't do anything but sing for us and bring us happiness. We see the prejudice involved in Of Mice and Men with Lenny, that he's judged over a couple actions and not for who he truly is. And in To Kill a Mockingbird, there are many different examples. There's Tom Robinson's example, that he's discriminated against because of his color and doesn't have a chance to speak up in court. There's Boo Radley. Boo Radley is discriminated against. Everyone thinks he's this monster, but he ends up being a hero more than once in the story, in fact, and in big and small ways. With the blanket over Scout's back and saving Jem at the end. And then we also see this as Scout with her situation with Aunt Alexandra about that dress code. And there are many different implied messages. So if we dig deeper, we can recognize the fact that you need to accept that you're your own unique self. And I read in one of my essays that Atticus is a hero to not only lawyers, but everyone else around the world, because in a time of such discrimination and lots of racism and all that stuff, he was himself, and that's what tore this out. That's what brought the level of prejudice down and kept disintegrating that whole era, was because of people like Atticus. Although he's fake and not real, I get it, but it's people like that change things. And that leads me to my next point, that you can't be like everyone else. So it kind of ties in with being your own unique self. And I read in another essay that Aunt Alexandra is a perfect example of this. She clearly follows along with society and does what everyone else is doing, so that she gets tied in the mix so she doesn't get discriminated, but she's the one that's discriminating but doesn't recognize it. So an example of this is obviously the example I've already mentioned with Scout. So she tells Scout that she needs to dress less like a man and more like a lady. So no coat coveralls, no jeans, more like dresses, and she needs to talk like a lady. But this is just following society and what everyone else is doing, like that snotty rich white person kind of thing. Not to be stereotypical, just saying. So this is what allowed the level of stereotypicalness and prejudice and discrimination to rise, because everyone thinks the same. So when someone thinks different outside that bubble, they get discriminated.